Hey everybody, I have a special guest with me today, Sammie Lee. How you doing, Sammie?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome. So the first time, I remember Sammie played bass with John Thurlow. That's the first time that I ever met him. But last year, I went into Kansas City and Chris Tofflon and Jay Thomas had a team and they found me and they're like, "Hey, you should lead the 6 a.m. This would be so
Yep,
fun." And
super.
yeah. Yeah, it was totally on the cuff, like that night, the night before, they're like, "Hey, you should come and play with us, maybe lead." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, we'll see." So we weren't sure. I think it was funny. We weren't sure until maybe 15 minutes before the set if I was going to drum or if I was going to lead because we weren't sure about like who was going to be there because it was during Thanksgiving, which is always
I
kind of
think Chris
crazy.
is late too. Chris is late.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And Chris was sick. I think Chris was not feeling well.
Yeah, sick. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot going on. Well, it was funny because we were playing the set, and I think like halfway through, I'm leading the set, and halfway through, Sammie and Chris Tofflon switched places, and I never knew it. And then so Sammie was then playing keys, and Chris was playing bass, and it was just so funny. The musical chairs aspect that, the good
Nice.
teams all get to do that. That's always pretty fun. So Sammie, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. Thanks for having me.
Hey,
Yeah.
so let everybody kind of know how you got started with music, how you kind of, first became aware of, spontaneous prophetic
Yeah.
music, and just kind of put us to where you are, kind of bring us through the story of where you're at today.
Love it. Well, I was born in Korea and my parents were not Christians, but they uh started going to church when I was 7.
Oh,
Um, and that was after one of my great grandmother, who was a believer, died so peacefully on her deathbed. Like, hit all the children were like, like successful people, and here's this old lady, and she says, "This man is calling me. I see a light, and I'm gonna go up." And she was so happy. So that sort of made everyone sort of reconsider their life and like, hey, let's go to church. That's actually literally how we went to church. 3 years later, my parents became dedicated decided to become missionaries. So
wow.
3 years after believing, I went with them and we lived in Indonesia. So I grew up in a boarding school there, and I always played piano because my mom was a pianist. So I grew up hating piano, but I fell in love with the guitar, and that must be in middle school. I fell in love with guitar. Grabbed everyone that I knew in the dorm that knew how to play, and then learned a few chords and here and there. But I began to really dive into really playing in a youth group, and just
Yeah.
like 99% of worship musicians and singers in the world, youth group was huge. And Indonesia is super close to Australia. So what happened was we had a Hillsong worship teams that toured through different international schools in Indonesia. Some were doing like a worship night, some were doing more music training, but that got our school exposed to, back then, that was the 2007 Mighty to Save,
Yeah.
that Save the King, that era. Man, those songs really shaped up my theology. Honestly, it shaped up what I thought about God, what I believed about God, and loved playing to those music. I was picking up bass too, so what I did was I cranked down on my little speakers that had treble, mid, and bass. I turned down the bass, followed, played along. But that's how I learned the songs. That's how I learned to fall in love with my instruments. But long story short, I had this moment with God in my 8th grade year. As I was wrapping up with 8th grade year, I was actually deeply challenged by just the reality of seeing, we had a bunch of kids with a lot of money without parental guidance, because we're in boarding school, that were just in deep sin. And I was just like, these older brothers and sisters, I like them, but Jesus, if you're real, I need to know, because or else, my life is just gonna look like that. And I need to know, because my parents, said they believe in you, and we're doing all this thing called missions, and I'm away from them, and all these things. I just need to know that you are real. And Jesus took my prayer seriously, and he appeared to me in a dream in the night. I was on a mountain that was burning on fire. It was
Mm.
literally on fire. It was blue fire, and there were young people worshiping and praying for each other, worshiping. And then someone taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it was Jesus. And you don't have to question it sometimes when you just see this guy, and literally, like, you cannot take your eyes off him. Like, his eyes were on fire. Like, the mountain was on fire, but his eyes were on fire, looking through my soul. And it was as if he was inviting me. So I wake up and just feeling this fear, but fear of God, honestly, that broke off all the doubt, broke off all of that. And from that moment, a week later, I have another dream where internal voice of God tells me, hey, you're gonna go to a place where young people pray and sing day and night. But hilarious, because I feel like most adults, when they have those kind of encounters, like, yes, Lord, oh yes, they write on their journal and all that stuff. But 14-year-old me goes, no, God, like, young people that I know don't pray and sing day and night. They party day and night. They know how to drink day and night. They know how to smoke every kind of things, put it in their lungs day and night. But one thing for sure is they don't sing and pray day and night. So I was super skeptical, and it was kind of hilarious, but it worked out where one of the pastor from Korea was like, hey, my son, I want to send him to a youth camp. But he's kind of shy. So if you want to come, if you want to go, like, I want to, like, invite you guys to do that. So from Indonesia, where I was, to Kansas City it's exactly 12 hours difference. So I traveled from there. I came to Kansas City, and then my host goes, "Hey, you want to go to the prayer room?" And I'm like, "What is a prayer room?" Because up until then, I was like entirely coming for a youth camp. Like, I had no grid. And he's like, my host goes, oh, prayer room, it's where young people pray and sing day and night. And he said it's so chill, but like, that was the exact phrase that really, like, that's what the Lord told me. So I go in there, John Thurlow is worshiping. There's a bunch of interns and youth that are like worshiping and praying. And I just got chill. So I left in 5 minutes, but anyway, that ATC, that was like life-changing moment for me. Nathan was leading worship. It was awesome. A bunch of other people like Matt Gilman was there, Corey Asbury, awesome counselors and leaders. Caleb Culver's message about being an end-time musician, and
Mm-hmm.
Blacker giving an altar call about Foreigner and all of that. It was life-changing. That it was so special. And at the end of the track, the Lord speaks to me again and says, hey, by the way, you're gonna move here. And I said,
Wow.
no, it really can't. That can't really happen. Like, I love how, like, I was so skeptical then, and I'm skeptical now. Hopefully I need to be more anyway. But actually, my parents had really huge favor with the government, but that got lifted. So actually my parents had to relocate. So long story short, there was an opportunity for me to move to the US because I was studying in English. So, Koreans, or maybe you don't know Koreans, but Koreans take education seriously. So
Very seriously.
thinking about picking back up studying in Korean, being in Korea, I was just like, oh, that can't happen. So thankfully I had some family members in KC that it just worked out for me to be here. Did 4 years of IHOPU, and then jumped on worship team then. So um, it just kind of worked out in a way where the Lord just opened up doors for international students to actually come to IHOPU.
Mm-hmm.
I did a semester of FMA because I jumped on John Thurlow's worship team full time. So just doing full-time worship team, learning under so many awesome worship leaders like John and different musicians, it just exponentially, like I went from like knowing a little bit to like doing it full-time with these guys, and it was awesome. Like I had different worship leaders like Chris Tofflin, like that really gave me opportunity. I used to go play in the Hope Cities with him when I
Yeah.
barely knew nothing. Worship leaders like Helen Lee, like
Yeah.
so many awesome people. So since then, I've been just part of IHOP. I've been part of playing with so many worship leaders, doing doing music stuff with them, traveling, ministering, teaching, and it's been a dream come true. Honestly, Lord really shaped me up to love what we do, even though in the jungles of Indonesia, I had no grid. Like we had no internet, we had no cell phone, we had nothing. Like, but just remember just coming here, and it just felt like I just had that sense in my heart, even at young age, like, huh, I am made to do this.
Yeah.
I love this. It feels like coming home. Like it's such an interesting idea, and I'm sure like there's hundred, maybe thousand other people that have the House of Prayer DNA that can remember back to that moment when they felt when they were first exposed to it and then had this connection. Like, yeah, I am created to do something like this. This is
Yeah.
so awesome. Right now, my life looks a little bit different. We just have a new little baby that
Oh,
joined their family.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So, and congrats to you too.
Yeah, thank
Congrats.
you.
So that's been life changing, man. It's been
Yeah,
quite
maybe talk about
crazy.
that because I think actually I do want you to talk about that because that's something that going from being and you would know this because it's happened sequentially so quickly for you, is going from being a single person to
Yep,
being a married person to being
yep,
a married person with children that your full-time job is music, right? Can
yes.
you can you maybe give some advice to some of those people like that are maybe just getting married right now or just getting because you're just going through it right now, but there are people that
Yeah,
haven't done it yet. Like, is there some pieces of advice or things that that the Lord has maybe talked to you about that would probably help them?
man. First of all, marriage is awesome.
I agree.
Marriage is truly a blessing. Godly wife is a blessing from the Lord. Parenthood definitely is a next game for sure. It's been kicking our butt, but it's been one of the most wonderful thing ever. Well, it's interesting because everyone's story is different.
Yeah.
Everyone's timing is different. But it worked out where I feel like I'll put it this. I'll go a little bit personal. Actually, things that I deal with every often now and then is because my parents were missionaries. I did not want to do full time ministry. I just did
Yeah.
not want to do it. I actually got a full ride to two different schools to do pre med. And I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it, but I just felt like the Lord was inviting me into the lifestyle of being a Levite, into a priesthood. And that doesn't look like me wearing fancy robes and slaughtering animals, but like like literally with music, worshiping,
Yep.
being a living a missional lifestyle.
Yeah, living
And
sacrifice. Yeah.
yeah, and that could be a trigger word for a lot of people. Like a lot of people in the Western world, especially Western Christian world, especially have this mentality. Okay, I am a missionary. I'm minister, or I am not. I'm just gonna be doing business,
Yeah,
or
the
I'm just gonna have
marketplace.
a job.
Yeah.
Right, marketplace. So it becomes two separate things,
Yes.
but the reality is we're actually all called to live missionally, wherever we are, however we are. We're all
Agreed.
called to the simple lifestyle, the fasted lifestyle, and that looks different for everybody. I mean, simple lifestyle does not mean poverty mentality. So
Yeah.
for me, getting married, taking care of baby, all I wanted to have a plan, like financial plan, and figure out what it really meant to provide for my family, because
Yeah.
lifestyle doesn't mean you just sit around and do nothing. So what that looks like for me is it has been traveling bunch, sharing message with a ton of people and ministering at different places, building partnership, building connections through different music that I've been doing and just serving at different conferences. But then once we figure out we were pregnant, which was last October, it was also a time where we had leaders from China come to IHOPKC and talk about the reset. And the emphasis was IHOP has been very busy working, but God is wanting to really build a family, strong family
Yeah.
that we have never seen before. So that has been the emphasis. So that really marked my heart to cancel all my traveling plans and we also figure out that we were pregnant. So I just in my heart realized as right now, quote unquote, as a full-time musician that also I travel like once a month. I realized like that had to end. Like I wanted to be most present in the community for my family, figuring things out. So what simple lifestyle looked for me was actually developing my craft, going full time doing studio stuff, working with different worship leaders and songwriters and crafting
Hmm.
songs,
Yeah.
and working full time in that way to provide for my family. It has been awesome because there's an element, there's a huge element called the spontaneous worship and prophetic worship that is awesome. There are things that during a live set that you cannot recreate elsewhere,
Yeah.
especially jumping in with different people, and I loved it. But at the same time, there was a desire for me to sort of take the game to the next level in a different way. Like I
Yeah.
think it goes in the spontaneous side goes, and the preparation and the different excellence look a little bit different in that sense. So been just devoting myself hours and hours every day, developing my craft in that. Though I still have a huge heart for the prayer movement, and
Yeah.
I love it. Just working with different worship leaders and songs, like even though I might be mixing for like 4 hours, the same little phrases, but that's worshiping God. So it looks like that for me. And long story short, with that in mind, like I think my temptation is always like, I need to have control. I need to take care of myself. But in the Bible, it really looks like if you are fully dedicating your life as a Levite, God takes care of you.
Mm.
And it says
Hmm.
in Matthew as well, seek first the kingdom of God. So I'm praying every day what that looks like.
Yeah.
That is very anti-cultural to the modern pop culture right now, where it's all about you. You figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
You do
Self-care.
what, yeah, self-care. Make sure everything is planned and thought out. And those are all important, and everyone's life will look a little bit different. But at the same time, it's been a journey for me to surrender myself to say yes and obey at little things. Like, for instance, I had like different job offers to sort of just move away from all the worship scene and all the different music scene. Though it's awesome, it does get pretty tiring, and the unknown can be hard. And I'm like, man, I wish I just did pre-med. Like, I see a couple of my friends like graduating right now. And I'm like, there's all these temptations to just find comfort and
Yeah.
seek comfort and just kind of cruise on and plateau through it. But no, it's been an active lifestyle of learning,
Yeah.
forced to learn in some ways to say
Yeah.
yes to what the Lord has for the singers and musicians here. So it's for those of you that might not really know, but we have here in Kansas City how we have a 24/7 worship and prayer. So people like me, we have a bunch of young people, some people
Yes.
that are younger than me, older than me, student body that is actively engaged in keeping the fire burning. That's the phrase that we use, which
Yep.
is keeping the worship and prayer going since 1999. So it's going to be 20-year anniversary very soon.
Yep.
So
I'll be
I
there.
am honored. Yeah, I'm honored to be with so many friends and amazing, amazing musicians and singers that love what they do and have dedicated their youth. Um, yeah, for me, it'll be 11 years this summer just being in this community,
It's
um,
amazing.
doing worship and prayer. My wife is also a singer. She sang with Ryan Kondo for a long time, Luke Wood for a long time. Now she is a full-time mom, but she will be, after maternity leave, she'll be jumping back on her team with Jonas Sparks. So
Yeah, come on. Yeah, your wife's a
that's
great
what
singer.
our family life as a musician and singer look like. So
Yeah, and it's different and it changes every season. And I think that
it really does.
yeah, and I think that we put so much, I think that, I know that every person has a role, and every person has specific, like, things that they're actually supposed to do, assignments, right? For
Yeah, yeah,
different seasons. You have assignments for different seasons. And it's like, I've the one thing that I noticed, the time that I was there was just, I saw so many, people that were 20, became 30, and they got married and had kids. And I've seen
yeah,
many moms, you know what I mean? They went from being a mom or they went from being single to being
yeah,
married, to then being moms. And I mean, I think it affects, honestly, I think it affects moms, and I'm going to have a mom on here pretty soon.
yeah.
Is I think it affects moms different than it affects the dads, as
True.
far as like
True.
finding your identity in your job, finding your
Yeah,
identity in your assignment, as opposed to like, hey, this is just a different assignment, and I'm just going to say this, and then we'll move on to the next topic is, I've heard Mike Bickle say many, many times that the greatest disciplers in the kingdom of God are moms, that
I
they have the most
wholeheartedly
amount of time, that they have the greatest amount of influence, and I just always want to honor and just give the
oh,
glory where it's due, and say, moms, thank
yeah.
you. Thank you for
No,
raising the next
for real.
generation. We
No,
appreciate you. We don't get to say it enough. And we honor you. We want to help you. And yeah, so I think moms are awesome. So
it is awesome.
yeah, so
They
so one of the questions that I got, that I just wanted to ask you about specifically, is because I know you're Korean, and growing up with Koreans, this, that, like, Koreans, speaking of mothers, Koreans are the only group of people that I know that you could be a full-time mom and have a doctorate.
Yep, that's
Like, a
true.
mom can be a doctor, meaning like she'll have 3 kids and she's not doing it, because you said it earlier, Koreans value education so
Yeah,
much,
for
right?
real.
That they're the only group of people that I know that there's a stay-home mom, and she's technically a doctor. And speaking specifically about just that, because it has to do with the education and excellence is so valued, right? Like, coming from a place of people that have just such we want to be excellent. Every single person wants to have excellence. How do we cultivate a culture of excellence without it getting to the point of where we're being prideful, right? Like, how do we have excellence
Yeah.
and not, and also battle the place of being prideful? What are your thoughts on that?
It's tricky because excellence looks different, and the definition is very different for everyone.
Yeah.
For some people, uh, I'll just talk about me. For me, excellence is having the technical skills, because technical skills are important. There's people that have the right heart, but man, they're a pain to play with. So,
Yes.
like at that point, like the other side of the spectrum is people with selfish, prideful heart that is so hard to work with. That just is just not a team player, and just is it's just a rude, and just character-wise not quite there.
Mm,
But with all that in mind, I think the best scenario, and a person that is excellent, is someone that has a teachable heart,
mm.
but that has also the skill set that they have cultivated over years to express on their instrument. So
Yeah.
with all that said, I mean, to me, having a teachable heart and opening up, being the first one to be asking question, and even though we all have fear of rejection, I think as a church, as a house of prayer, as a worship team, always constantly having a conversation about cultivating culture, to be teachable, is one of the most important thing in any culture. I think same thing goes for Korean culture as well. Is yes, everyone is very talented, but sometimes I think downside is I think Korean culture in general, a lot of Koreans are shy.
Mm,
So they don't know how to fully step into what they're capable of doing.
mm.
I don't know if
Interesting.
so. And for instance, I was in Brazil last year, and that is a whole different culture, man. They are wild. They go all out. Some of them are probably one of the most phenomenal musicians that I have met are in Brazil,
Yeah.
for real.
Wow.
But at the same time, not everyone is at that level either, but their passion is right here.
Yeah.
uh, but I've also encountered a lot of conversations there where people do butt head a lot because they have ego, they have a little bit of that issue. And that's every culture. And I'm not just trying to stereotype each
Yeah.
culture, but being a Korean living in America that also lived in Indonesia, which is very tropical, very musical people as well.
Mhm.
I think that just having different experiences working with different musicians of all culture, I
Mhm.
think it's knowing what your strengths are. So being self-aware is key. Knowing, but at the same time being teachable, because no matter where you are in your experience, um, there's always more things to learn. There's always
Yes.
and I think, and you're open to that conversation, that elephant in the room uh, gets addressed. Like that's when you grow as an individual, but as a team.
Yes.
And I think part of the thing that we're trying to, that I have been trying to cultivate in my musical uh, journey, and also with my friends and my peers, with different artists and different worship teams that I'm working with, is always opening up for that conversation, because there's this phrase like showing up is half of the game,
Mm.
but that phrase usually is to inspire people. Hey, show up. Just do it. Like show up. Then something will happen. But to me, when I hear that phrase, like showing up, like really is only half. Like if you're just showing up and you're just checked out, or like you're just there, like just because you've done something for a long time doesn't mean you're a veteran, doesn't mean that you're excellent. So
Mm.
like always being there, present and willing to learn and willing to give and willing to build something, building a culture, building a team. I think that is a person who is excellent, that have managed to figure out what it means to be skillful, and at the same time not letting that pride um, be in who they are. Because you know this, Nathan, like when it comes to music,
Mhm.
music production, music industry, music, whatever, anything, you put music in front of it, it's a very coveted thing. A lot of jealousy and a lot of envy, and it's just gonna happen. It's just what's gonna happen, and that's what the enemy uses to bring division and
Yes.
isolation. And I think when people drop their ego and start conversation and start connecting and start asking questions, I think that's one of the safest place for the Lord to actually pour anointing of fresh oil and of fresh songs. I think it's in that place of unity. I really
Yes.
believe it. Yeah.
Yes. And I think just creating, I mean, the idea of the culture is even in creating, like, I think, we hear this term a lot, like safe spaces, but I really do believe that there's a place of that there needs to be a place where it's safe to be
Yeah.
able to give and take constructive criticism, right? Where that needs
Absolutely.
to be like, we need to, I think, Paul talks about how that we one to another need to be submitted to one another. And I think that, that's a difficult thing to submit yourself and say, hey, because I remember, even when I was first starting to lead worship, and then, when I got to Kansas City, one of the first things that I did was I went to the worship leaders after I would lead and asked them, hey, is there anything that
Yeah.
I could change? Right. And, some of them would say, well, I don't like that you did that thing, or maybe change this. And at first it's that, I wanted you just to tell me that I did a good job and that's it.
Yeah.
I was hoping you were just going to say, no, you're perfect, but maybe you should try this. And, I can remember going back and going, oh man, I was hoping they were just going to say great job and that's it. But no, they said, hey, try doing this instead, or maybe
Yeah.
don't do it in that key, or maybe, you know, and I've had, man, I can't tell you how many conversations, but you know what, those times where I know for me, I submitted, right? Even if they
Yeah.
were, I think another thing too is, you know, I think as a worship leader, you being in charge, I think you have to lead the way in vulnerability and
Yeah.
lead the way in
Absolutely.
safety, and
Yeah.
be like in times of debriefing or in times where you're having those discussions, be the first one that says, hey, is there anything, you know, like with a group of people, is there
Right.
anything that I can do to help serve you better as a
Yeah.
worship leader in this set, or in this worship time, in this whatever? Is there anything that I could do better to help serve you? And not
Yeah.
looking for the just, hey, the pat on the back, and making it
Right.
clear, I'm not looking for a pat on the back, but I'm looking really for communication. I'm looking for
Yeah.
clarity. I'm looking for how can I serve you better? And then
Mhm.
taking the advice, taking that from them and going, you know what? I value your opinion. And, you know, just as a side note, I remember Mike telling us one time in a meeting, like, be very receptive, be really receptive to criticism in
Yeah.
general. Be
Yeah.
really receptive, because he says, remember, just think about it like this: criticism is like getting a free consultant to tell you
Yeah.
where all of your deficiencies are in your abilities. Like, think of them as a consultant that you didn't have to pay.
Right.
Right? There's people that he goes, there are people that pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to consultants to come in
Yeah.
and
To
give
give
them
the
criticism,
evaluation. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
criticize. Now, mind you, you take criticism just like you would with everything else. Just take it, evaluate it. But the truth
Yeah.
is, like, don't look at every person being critical of you as bad. Like,
Yeah.
take the criticism, really ponder, really think about it. Thirdly, the great thing about being a believer that has the Holy Spirit inside of you is you can actually talk to the Holy Spirit and say, Holy
Yeah.
Spirit, what you are the Spirit of truth, what's true,
For
right?
real.
So you take their criticism, you talk to the Holy Spirit, and then thirdly, you talk to the people that are above you, like people that are your worship pastor, people that's your pastor. You can bring those things to them, and you know what, those three witnesses, right? More than two, technically you only need two, but you
Yeah.
get those three witnesses. Those three witnesses will help you grow. And I'll tell you what, the people that grow the fastest are the people that do those three things, that they
I think so
take
as
it
well.
and they change it. And I just, man, I just think that you as a leader have to open that floodgate and create the place where you as a leader, how you respond to your team criticizing you, or how you respond to criticism, will really determine that culture that's created. You know, because if
Yeah.
you as
And
a leader
for
can be really good with that, it will change.
Yeah, and for people that are listening, and this is not just blatant rebukes that we're talking about. It's more of
Yes.
the positive, constructive criticism, and like evaluation. And
Yes.
at the same time, we try to have like a healthy amount, because just telling everyone, "Oh yeah, you did a great job," like doesn't help. But there's also context and the right spirit to do it too. Like there's some
Right.
context that maybe it's someone that is just not at the right, like maybe it's a mom that is helping out like that first time in that year, that's just wanting to help out, maybe like criticizing her or like commenting on how she was flat the whole set. Maybe that's not the best context. But just having a discernment to
Yeah,
build and
I think
opening up.
having discernment. Yeah, I think having discernment is key in terms of really asking, like, okay, is this the amount? And I think that, you know what, and the truth is what you're gaining when you have these times of constructive. I think the point is constructive criticism,
Yeah.
constructive, where you're being constructive. It's not the pulling down of someone; it's the building
Yeah.
up. It's the
Building up. Yes.
admonishment to the point of trying to build. And I think that when you do that, the cool thing about give and take of criticism, the coolest thing happens. This X factor comes in place. It's called trust. That you really
Yeah.
start to trust one another, and you're like, oh, oh, this person, like I know for a fact because I trust Sammie, because I trust his opinion, because I
Yeah,
trust him, I can know everything that he's saying is for me to win more.
yeah, for
And
real.
when you start getting in the place with excellence, like where it's not competition, but it's collaboration, that we as a team are looking for the greatest good for every person on the team, that we can go, no, 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 the best thing for me is for Sammie to win. How can I, like if you were on a football team or a soccer team or a basketball team, the constructive criticism is not so that just one person's batting average, I'm even
Right.
changing sports again, that their
Yeah.
average of hits is not just their hits are higher, but we as a team are winning more,
Yeah, for
right? Where
real.
we can say collectively, the goals that we have are being fulfilled, right? And I think that if we can create a place of trust, create a place of safety, not, and I think that actually I'll say this, safety doesn't mean that we can't disagree. Safe
Yeah.
does not exclude conflict.
Yep.
I believe conflict and friction are necessary for growth. But I think that conflict and friction in the place of love and trust are the only way that conflict and friction can actually develop
Absolutely.
growth.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. As a musician, I've, for the worship leaders that I play with, I've always tried to make that personal connection and ask them, hey, is there things that I can learn? Is there things
Mm,
that you have feedback from me? Because sometimes it's easier for you to bring that conversation up, for you to receive, than someone if I feel like in Western culture, it's a little bit rude for people to just come, hey, by the way, I'm just gonna comment on you. Like that could be kind of hard too. But more often than not, you have different ideas and concept or comments that could build a team.
yes.
Like for me, my job as a music producer and an engineer and a sound designer, unfortunately, my job is to be critical. Like
Yeah.
I have no time to sweet talk and just just kind of fake it, because if I do, I have to do the 8 hours of editing.
Yeah.
I gotta be, hey, by the way, you've been seeing like this, and that's actually hurting you. And it's actually sounding pretty bad. And literally, like things like those kind of little comments in the right spirit, too. I wouldn't just
Yeah.
say you bad, but actually knowing how to do it in the right spirit open up
Yes.
so many healthy conversation, and it comes down to trust. And then these worship leaders and these songwriters and singers, they begin to trust me because man, he's gonna tell me when I'm not doing best. He knows. Therefore, like it builds them up, their skill set up. And someone like literally I commented, hey, by the way, you didn't know you scoop into every high note that you sing. And the person's like, I never knew that. I'm like, let's listen to this. I'll play them what I've recorded, and they'll be like, I never knew that. So
Yeah.
sometimes that it's people are not self-aware sometimes.
Yes.
I'm not self-aware sometimes. So it's like iron sharpening iron. So in a team context, it's always helpful to have people that are always open to it. Going back to like the worship leader conversation as a musician, believe it or not, I have played and travel with so many worship leaders because of that. I think because I opened up that conversation, they're
Mm,
like, this guy actually cares about how I sound,
yeah.
how my team sounds, because he's willing to bring an A game, and that makes me look good because he's doing what he's supposed to do wholeheartedly, instead of a
Yes.
musician that goes, oh yeah, I don't know the song, I'm just gonna wing it, it's fine. That doesn't translate very well of confidence and trust than someone else that brings their A game. And to me, two people that I keep thinking in mind is Adam Snigoski and Cassie Kimball. Like these guys are probably one of the best musicians that I know, but believe it or not, they're probably one of the most thoroughly prepared musicians that I know.
Yes.
Um, I I could think of five other names that can shred guitars, shred bass, but in terms of the musicianship of of preparedness and excellence, they start there. So
Yeah.
instead of just winging it, they're always so thoroughly prepared that when there is time to be spontaneous, time to reach, time to change it up, they have such a solid foundation to build from. And I just marvel at when they play, but also how serious they take their job. So for me, props to them. I
Yeah.
always tell them that too as well too. But
They're
as
two of my
musicians,
favorites.
yeah, as musicians and as worshipers, I think developing that personally, but also as a culture, is key. Those kind of musicians or singers are keepers. So
Yes. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to when Jay went to the Night Watch and he started a worship team for the first time in the Night Watch. I joined at the same time, and I was his drummer, and
yeah,
Cassie was the bass player,
I
Adam
love it.
Smigalski was the electric, and Chris Tofflon was the keyboardist. And
Nice.
it was or not, Chris Tofflon was the acoustic, and Jay
Probably
was
acoustic.
so he was
Yeah,
acoustic player.
yeah,
Yeah, and that team was ridiculous. And I can vouch that those two are so incredibly, they have, and I think the thing that's clear too is both of them are not just musically proficient, but
right.
they're biblically literate. They know,
Yes,
both of them know the Bible. They know, and they're both incredible servants. Like they both clearly know that
I
their
agree.
job is to, as musicians, like, man, I can remember doing, at the prayer room, we do cycles. And I remember just being in conversations with them and them and us all discussing what are things that we can do that not, because part of it is that, hey, it promises it, the Bible promises in Isaiah that prayer will be enjoyable, right? It's not just
Yeah,
something we do dutifully, but we get to enjoy it as well. And I think that as musicians, I hear people say, well, how do you not get bored doing these cycles? How do you not get bored being up there on stage? And I think part of it is do things that you enjoy. Like
yeah,
have conversations with the worship leader, have conversations with your singers, like open up dialogue, do things that you're like, wow, this is thoroughly enjoyable. And I think people like Cassie, like Adam, are always like, what are things that we can do that I don't think it's wrong to stimulate, that have things that are stimulating, right, to your mind, that are stimulating to your soul even, right? Because you're supposed to love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, all your
yeah,
soul, and all your strength. That every party, the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, the everything, the mental, every single part is supposed to give to God. And I think that those two
yeah,
specifically, I think about them with the technical parts, even with
yeah.
the loving God with their mind and their strength, that they're
I love it.
loving. And it's
Mhm.
like, I think that is so key, that we need to understand that part of being, not being bored is not, like you said, I'm not just showing up,
Yeah,
I'm going to be there, and I'm going to engage my heart, and I'm going to also engage my mind and my spirit and my soul and my strength. And I think
absolutely.
I think that I think that's it. And speaking specifically about just musicians, what are some other qualities, characteristics? Like what are some other things, both musically and spiritually? First, start with musical. What are some things that you would say for musicians who are in worship now? Because you've been a musical director, you've been a
Yeah,
keyboardist, you've been a guitarist,
yeah.
you've been a bass player, you've done you've done a myriad of things with touring with people. I mean, you've done so many different things. What are some key, um, specifically musical qualities, like traits, that every single person that that's getting into worship, what are some of those things that they should have? And then we'll get into the, spiritual qualities,
Yeah. Man,
or
for
things that
me,
you've noticed that every single person that
yes.
you've admired, because I know that you've done it. Like these are the things that, hey, clearly they know what they're doing.
Um, this might sound funny or like duh, but people that I love playing with or that really looked up to are people that also love listening to music.
Mm,
They're constantly searching and geeking out, loving, nerding out on some songs, or like falling in love with listening.
mm,
There, I mean, nature of 24/7 means each team does 6 sets. So we have a ton of conversation where a lot of musicians and singers say things like, I'm so tired to listen to new music. I'm so musiced out. But for me, I never understood that because I do understand the tired aspect of it,
Mm,
but I just love listening to new music or like loving songs so much
mm,
or working on music so much that I was never musiced out. I was bored with bad music, but I was never musiced out. And I'm not saying that bored prayer meetings are bad music. I mean, God is glorified, and I'm not saying that's bad music, but sometimes just when I am just surrounded with people that are like excited to listen to new music, excited to talk about it, like those are a lot of the times that kind of like carrying on from our previous conversation,
hmm.
those are the people that are constantly growing and
Yes.
that have not lost the simplicity of just loving and enjoying music. Someone
Mm,
that knows how to enjoy it and feel it, it's a whole another world to play with those kind of people
yeah.
and be those kind of musician than someone who's there to just gig, someone that's there to just for another paycheck and just doing it. So
Yeah.
those,
Oh, that's
I
so
mean
good.
that's so good because then more often than not, that's when those people want to pick up their instrument and practice.
Yeah, and you know that's
Those are the
interesting to me.
factors that
Yeah.
motivate. Yeah,
And that's interesting. I mean, that specifically is interesting to me because I remember one of the clear things that last year when I was playing with you guys on that set, I was like, oh, clearly these people aren't just playing a chord progression.
yeah,
No, do you know what I mean? Like when we were
yeah,
playing, I was like, we were all playing together, but I'm like, oh, everybody is listening to what everybody else is doing, and we're all playing off of each other. Like we're having a conversation while we're playing. Like I remember there, David was doing this one thing, and I was doing this other thing, and you were doing another thing, and we were kind of
yeah,
like, oh yeah, remember that little, and we do that little lick, and it's like he'd
yeah,
play it, and he'd go, I go, oh yeah,
yeah,
okay. And so we do this little thing, and it was like, oh okay, this is that art, and I think that's a huge thing, that practicing the art of listening.
yeah.
Right, because there is that aspect of being a prophetic, spontaneous musician, and that I'm listening to the Holy Spirit. But there's also the thing of when we're doing spontaneous music that, hey, as a good worship leader, I want to be listening to my team. You've said this like, hey, there's
Absolutely.
things that the bass player might play, or there's things that the singer might. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've heard a little descant on a piano line. They'll play just this accidental little descant thing, right? In the middle of, whatever. And that has been the catalyst that will trigger something in my mind, and then will become something big that somebody else, like, oh, the guitarist then pulls into that little thing. And that I think that there is a part of the whole trust thing is when we have more of having that art of listening to one another and really feeding off of
Oh
that
yeah.
the energy and feeding off of the little pieces. I mean, we get the little breadcrumbs and we put these little breadcrumbs together to be something much bigger, that the
For real.
sum of the breadcrumbs are greater than the teeny little parts. And the cool thing about the sum, meaning the total of it, is exponentially better than just the teeniest tiniest, that
Oh,
20 of these little guys actually become something this big and
oh yeah,
beautiful.
absolutely. Like you were mentioning David, guys like my friend David Forlew and Judah
Right.
Earl. I love those guys because when we're playing, there's that element of trust. There's no longer the set chord progression.
Yes.
Sometimes there's no longer set key or time signature,
Yes.
meaning the opportunity to adventure through so many variety of genre and music. It opens up because first they're excellent musician.
Yes.
They're by far one of the most creative musicians that I know that can actually play their instrument, understand the theory, understand feel. But it's especially Judah, David too. But those guys are so good at listening,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Agree.
knowing the nuance, picking up the nuances, communication, and music is a language itself. But more you speak it, and more you understand it, more you can communicate it. Sometimes better than language. I think that's the beauty of sidetrack is that's why I love doing sound design and film score stuff because there's things that I can communicate more than
Yes.
just with words. So, but
Correct. And I
that's
think,
another
yeah.
topic.
And I think, like I said, they say picture, you know, a picture says 1,000 words. It's like, I think sometimes a sound can speak 1,000 emotions, you know,
Oh
or
yeah.
like there's emotions that you can feel. And I've heard it said before that music is the language of the soul.
Wow, I agree.
That the
Agree.
language of the soul is completely, you know, inside, like we can speak from our soul as opposed to even trying to give it
Yeah.
language per se. That's awesome. Hey, let me ask you one more question, and then I'm gonna
Yeah.
get you some rapid fire stuff. So if you one of the other questions that I got was, if you were starting as a worship leader, specifically as a worship leader, if you're just starting to play piano, what are some tips that you would have for somebody that's just starting to play the piano?
Um, there are many things, but I want to say fall in love with a song. And what I mean by that is when someone is picking up a new instrument, whether you're young or old,
Mm.
it is pressuring. Like for instance, if I were to look at piano, it's like where do I start? There's like so many things. Like what do I do?
There's
Like
like
what?
88 places to start.
Right. There's like a theory aspect, and there is a technical aspect, the fingering, and all these things. It gets kind of crazy. But especially, I would advise you pick different songs that are simple enough. Worship songs a lot of times. I feel like there are so many resources on YouTube that teaches song, like each fingering with the
Yeah.
keyboard layout, and then I know that worship you have a bunch of them. I know Elevation Worship does that as well,
Yes.
and different worship teams and worship group there's so many resources of learning their song. I say start there, fall in love with the song, because then you'll feel more confident because you'll actually know how to do something from the start and then actually finish it. There's an element of performance where if you learn to do it, your body remembers that detail, and you pick up the subtle things that you wouldn't have known by just studying theory alone. And then I would say apply theory after, but it'll be more like having a measurable goal, like I'm gonna learn a song a month, maybe it's 2 songs, and then not branching out to learning all 12 keys. Like for instance, for me, I started with the simple keys, the C chord, the C major, which
Mm.
is all the white keys on the piano, and then added G, which is adding F sharp in the
One.
midst of it, so one
Yeah.
sharp,
Just that one
and then
sharp.
things like that, and adding into D another with the C sharp and on top. And now this might not even make sense to you, but what I'm trying to say is don't feel the pressure to know everything right then. Start with that one song. Start with that one um, scale practice. There's a bunch on YouTube as well. That's where I learned almost everything. Like that's how I learned almost every studio trick, other than asking and interning with different people, is starting at YouTube. There's so much resources out there. So
Yes.
hope that is helpful to you.
Oh, that's very
Um,
helpful.
yeah,
I think that you know, I think of two things specifically. When you say that, I think that's really important advice that we forget. You know, I think it's funny. You know, the three pieces of advice that I always tell people is like with a difficult thing. You know, that they say. You know, there's the one proverb which is you know, the a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right?
yeah.
So like, hey, I want to walk. Well, you better start walking one step at a time. The second is, you know, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. You know,
That's
and
one
then
way to
you
put
know,
it.
in the movie, What About Bob? You know, Bob Wiley,
Yeah.
Bill Murray talks about baby step. You just have to get from the one thing to the next thing, next thing, next
Yeah.
thing. And I think even you saying, hey, just start with a song. Start
Mhm.
with a song in the key of C that I think, you know, Chick Corea, who's an incredible jazz pianist. I mean, he's an incredible keyboardist. He
Yep.
talks about the way that he learns is he calls it the gradient. He calls it like the gradient method, where he'll play a song, and then as soon as he messes up, he slows it down and does it a couple times, and he does it gradually. And he talks about, he has an entire video, like VHS tape that I own, that I
Yeah.
don't even
Love
play
it.
piano, but I watched it because it was the method of how he learns. He talks about how he does things slowly. He messes up, he'll slow it down, he'll gradually just speed it up, gradually speed up, and just go to the next part. And then if he messes up, he stops. He gradually just does it slower until he gets that, like you said, the muscle memory. And I think that's a super, super important. I think that's a super, super important thing to know.
Another quick tip that I actually have done when I was starting was piano and acoustic guitar. Those are two very unique instruments because you can play chord and dictate the rhythm.
Yes.
Like for instance, like drums, very rhythmic, but not as melodic.
Correct.
But both piano and guitar, I think the reason why they're a central piece to modern worship music or modern music in general is because they can do the melodic and the rhythmic as well. So when it comes to learning piano, it can get kind of confusing. All right, there's chords, but now I need to know the pattern and all these things. What I started doing when I was starting was I actually practiced a piece, but one hand at a time. Meaning, if there was more melody happening on the right hand, I practiced that first. And then maybe there's more bass note chords that happen on the left side and timing happen at a different time. I practice that separately and then practice here, practice there, practice the rhythm differently. And then just even divided up that simple thing into simpler portion. And then you put it together slowly, because speed in music, speed is byproduct of precision. Yes. So if you learn how to be precise slowly, speed will naturally come. You'd be surprised how fast you will be able to play fast. But that's not the point. But if you learn how to develop that muscle memory, simple step like that, it will really help you. I've really I've done that for a long time. Different rhythm schemes too, especially when I'm moving into different keys. For instance, until 3 years ago, I did not know how to play an A flat and E flat. So there you go. I'm in a learning journey with you as well. So.
That's great advice. So right here is where we are going to stop the video portion. So if you want to hear the rest of the conversation, you're going to need to switch over to the audio portion. We are on Spotify, we're on Stitcher, we're on whatever. But before you do that, before we switch over to audio, this is what I want you to do. I want you to tell me what your favorite part, our favorite quote of this conversation was, and put a timestamp on it in the comments. Put a timestamp in it so I can know what are the parts that really resonated with you. So be sure to like, be sure to share, and now go over to the audio right now. If you've enjoyed the podcast, think about giving it a review or 5 stars, a like, or a share. For more information, visit modernpsalmist.com.